Saturday morning, Central Standard Time. I am joined by our good friend, the Prudentialist. How are you, sir?
I'm doing quite well, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I am quite honestly amazed that we started on time. I thought that I was getting late, very, very late. We had 5 minutes to go, and you joined, and then now we're here, so it worked out very well. Before we get too far into this, I figure that it would be good to thank everyone that has subscribed and donated in the past. Obviously, in the description, we have Subscribe Star, which is our non-alphabet alternative that does not give any of your money to Google and gives more of a cut to me. So I would like to thank Nevermore Knight, Prince of Parma, Claude Boyd, Yeehaw Yenzer, Jerome Urbic, and anonymous user Conan Wells, Brian Bugno, Enigma, and Falling Outside the Normal Moral Constraints. And last week, when Jay Burden and I finished, we had Prince of Parma, who was watching back later, who had started the stream later, and he sent 2 super chats that we were unable to get to, most unfortunately. So I would like to read those out now, and not at all the subject that I had you on to talk about, Prudentialist, but if you have comments, then by all means, these were super chats.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, so last week, Jay Burden and I brought up Jordan Peterson and whether or not he was good, bad, containment, etc. We both had our own opinions, very run-of-the-mill or standard, I'm sure. Prince of Parma sent in 2 super chats. I'm not entirely certain where in the stream he was, but the first super chat was the scriptural analysis of Jordan Peterson is quite decisive. And I don't know if he means divisive there or decisive, as in something else. But obviously, Peterson does not have the most orthodox interpretation of scripture.
No, I kind of find this is sort of my running gag with him is that he goes through the most Dostoevsky style of Christian suffering and comes out of it as someone who decides to just sell his soul and have the most like Gnostic view of scripture sometimes. So it's like, oh, you endured the trial, but you failed.
Right? Yeah. You can come out of the trial with the with the bounty that you're supposed to, forgiveness and salvation.
But don't worry, on the Daily Wire Plus, we can see him talk to Benjamin Netanyahu and Ben Shapiro.
Was it worth it, Jordan? So that was the first super chat, and the second super chat sent by, once again, Prince of Parma, says that creationist ministries tend to dislike Jordan B. Peterson's thought per conquest law. Presumably they're meaning that they would view Jordan Peterson to the left, trying to bring in evolution or whatnot through the back door, from their perspective anyways, which would make sense to me, but I have no clue if you have any comment on that issue at all.
I mean, there's a long history of church fathers and saints being adamantly against that sort of concept. They're more aligned on the creationist view of things. So it's just, they'd probably be very much against it as well. And I think that trying to reconcile things that go against both scriptural and, all basis of how Christians have viewed the creation of the world and how it has continued to, they wouldn't be welcomed in really any place, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine Peterson even going back to like the church at the height of the Enlightenment and trying to pass off the sort of symbolism and metaphor analysis of Genesis. I don't think it would go well, but who knows? So with all of that out of the way, we have, or I have at the very least covered my obligations. We have read out our super chats, thanked our donors, and once again, if you want to find the Prudentialist, you can see the link to his Find My Friends in the description. But for those that don't know you, Prudentialist, what is it that you do? What do you talk about? Why are you on?
Oh, sure. Well, thank you again, Ryan, for having me on. For those of you who don't know me, my name is The Prudentialist. Also, you can call me Matt. It's fine. I mainly cover international relations, culture, and domestic politics here in the United States. Every Saturday, actually later today, I host a show called Prudent Observations, taking a look at international relations theory and just what the heck is going on in the world, and applying those concepts from an academic sense into very real-world terms for us to understand. And my content is divided in three ways: weekly international relations, culture and media, and domestic politics in scripted streams and unscripted formats, whether that's fishing or otherwise. So if you don't know me, by all means, check out the link below. And thank you once again, Ryan, for having me on.
Oh, you're very welcome. The fishing streams are very cozy.
Well, thank you.
Which I'm absolutely certain is the full intention behind them. With all of that being said, I have done something absolutely terrible, and I basically threw out the idea of the stream to you, came up with the title, and then here we are today. That is all the preparation that I have given you. But that's the that was the intention of mine, because basically everything that I have heard you speak about, bar the specialized content in international relations and whatnot, has been dealing with this topic of atomization, the strength or the failing strength of the social bonds that we currently see around us, dying out practices, cultural memory, all of these things you usually talk about to very great analysis, I might add. So I was hoping to get a sort of more relaxed and freer flowing discussion, as opposed to the much more scripted and well thought out alternatives that you could find on other channels.
So, well, thank goodness I can talk out of my rear end at great lengths of time. Well, no, so like this started about around 2021. This has been mainly my big project out of 2022, is to talk about these issues. But I made a video back at like very late 2021, summertime, I think, or fall. But I did this video called "The Consequences of Working from Home." And I thought that, as great as it is to enjoy the work from home schedule, to sort of lounge around in your office, I thought that it was like a really big invasion of one's personal space, that we're no longer having a distinctive office work environment versus those that, if you have a shop or you own a business, it's different. But for those that commute and go to their jobs, now all of a sudden that space that differentiates between the work and home life has been very much violated. And I said, as comfortable as it is to, get up at like, 7:45 and then slip out of your jammies into a shirt to go to work, that's great. But at the same time, you've turned your bedroom into your office. And I think that was very dangerous. And then your video came out about the Zoomers, which I think has probably been one of the most influential videos that out of anyone in these spheres has done, because it does really give us a really good understanding of the generation ahead of us and the generation that will come after, Gen Z. And then both myself and Dave, the distributist, had talked about this. And I thought about the fact that, well, between COVID and my own life at that time, I was just like, I've spent more time online than I ever had prior to. Because, when things are locked down or there's social distancing, you've watched now almost every generation in America be transmogrified into screen addicts. And I thought that's very dangerous. And so, in 2022, I wrote an essay called, strategy. I think it was literally called "Strategies for Navigating the Ruins" or something like that on Substack, before I even knew what the event was. And, that had been my progress forward, because I think that we've seen now, between distance education with kids, everything has this layer of distance when we communicate on the internet. I mean, even when people start talking for relationships, it's always a talking phase. It's always a texting phase. And so I've been really grown with great concern about what is to happen for future human relations. And does anyone have any real meaning teleologically, spiritually, or even just physically outside of their screen time? Because we talk about people who get banned off Twitter, for instance, like, oh, I hope they're okay, or I hope they're happy wherever they are, as if they have died, when, if anything, only their digital presence has been temporarily cut off to us. But for all intents and purposes, people do treat these individuals, anonymous or otherwise, like they are dead. And so it's been my ongoing project of 2022, is to find strategies or methods that might help us alleviate this problem.
Right. There's something quite terrifying that at the very least, the majority of people online have started personalizing people by their online presence. It takes the humanity out of it, and it basically gets you ready for the cyberpunk changes that you might start seeing by certain corporations or wealthy individuals. The mindset's already there. Everyone is just their online present. The person is the one that the actual human is the person just maintaining the online presence. And when the online presence is gone, it's dead. It's a very stark shift in thought processes from 30 years ago, where it was it's the human that is present, and anything else that they do anonymously or otherwise in literature or even online at the time or all this other stuff, it's just it's something that the human does. But now it's the online presence has a person, if you will. Which is why when people look for face reveals or all this other stuff, they are looking for like the online presence, the online person, to show the human behind it, rather than the human to show, who they actually are.
Oh,
There's a subtle change there.
Yeah, you see that with, and I hate the word e-celebrity, because at the end of the day, they are celebrities in their own respective niche. But I mean, it's the e-celeb. I mean, you saw that not too long ago, and I only knew about this because someone on Twitter, it was trending on Twitter, but apparently there's some Minecraft YouTuber called Dream that had been anonymous for years or played behind a mask, and they did a face reveal. And then it was just like, oh, everyone made a big deal about it. Like there was 1 million people watching it. And I'm sure to me, it's a little terrifying to think about it. But at the same time, like if you've been doing it, you have a cult of personality, you've got millions upon millions of people watching you, that's fine. But I think that we're already living in that sort of cyberpunk dystopia. It's just, your I guess you would call them some kind of, modification to your body is just, ripping out chunks of your forearm to create a new organ or whatever, and a grotesque facsimile of it. And everyone's addicted to their phones. And now they're talking about Neuralink and all that from Elon Musk. So you best start believing in cyberpunk dystopias, because you're living in one.
Right, and I have had the thought come around. I'm sure it's a very common thought. I wonder if we just aren't in those sort of dystopic worlds just because the technology isn't quite there yet. Because everyone, when you read those, it's always, wow, society is really atomized and degraded in this dystopia. Anyways, back to my day-to-day life, where I work from home, I talk from a laptop, and all this other stuff. Yeah, so I have wondered if a company was to put like we will rip off your forearm and replace it with a robotic arm, a healthy forearm and all this other stuff, and just replace it with something transhumanist. How many people would go for it?
More than I'd like to admit.
Yeah, me too. And there's something very Gnostic about the current culture that would do that. Because beforehand, at any other point in Western history, you would have people that would say, I'm not just going to, cut off my body when it is fine, even though, usually it was like a pact with a demon or Satan or something like that. You would sacrifice part of your body to get some sort of otherworldly power, or this worldly power, I suppose you could say more accurately. And no, very few people would accept that because they viewed it as inherently immoral. Why would you sacrifice part of your body, which was sacredly given to you from God, for some sort of extra power that you can only have in this life? It was viewed as insane. And then in this culture, people view their body as something bad, something to get rid of, either by abusing it, which is the higher rates of obesity, drug addiction, all this other stuff, or by trying to augment it, which is your internet fanboys looking with those sort of bugman eyes at CRISPR, cybernetic implants, and all this other stuff. Which perhaps you have some comment on that. It's just it strikes me as very Gnostic, the current culture.
Well, yeah, well, one for sure, but I mean also it's just the complete very kind of warning that Christ gives us about what does it profit a man, because we are selling our souls in some ways to rid ourselves of what we would consider what makes us human, or we fall into temptation. I mean, I think that's probably the greatest thing that we've seen. There's a phrase I've heard being used from everyone from like Protestant charismatics to Orthodox priests, which is that we live in a global antichrist system, which I quite enjoy the use of that term. Because,
I hadn't heard that before, but that's fantastic.
I know, I love it. I'm probably going to start using it from now on, besides modernity. So
I might rename the stream to that after the fact, the global antichrist system.
Well, there you go. And the concept is that everything offers the alternative pathway to Christ. And I had this long conversation with a friend of mine on Twitter. His name is Stained Haynes, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's
yes.
He's a great guy, and he's Greek Orthodox, mainly by nature of birth and living in Queens. And he was saying, he's like, I never really had my religion or my faith in Christ tempted until I came on Twitter.com, and people started telling me to just stop believing in him. And then he would ask, well, what should I believe in? And then they didn't give him an answer. It was just, don't believe in Jesus Christ. And I thought that was just like, well, there's a priest that at one time said, he's just like, that God is real because all of our enemies worship Satan. And I think that you see that a lot, where all these temptations or worldly offers and desires, where people are sort of falling heads over heels for it because, well, it's easy to now believe in the demonic idea that actually, no, you're not just a neurodivergent individual, or that you're just a kid that was socialized poorly because you were raised on the internet because your mom handed you her iPad when you were like 4 years old in the grocery store. No, it's that you really should just be lopping off organs and telling yourself that you're normal in the way that you are. I think that is an excellent form of demonic attack and spiritual warfare. That is the unseen warfare. And with that, it's just like, well, yeah, we're going to take these rather Gnostic interpretations as well to raise ourselves or become God, or to achieve our own gnosis of things. And in doing so, it has destroyed the very things that make us human, that make us creatures created by God. And I think that is going to be the real system that we're dealing with of our age. And I think that we are seeing, on one hand, a very small minority of people, because I mean the faith in the United States, for the first time that Gallup had reported, regular church attendance was below the 50% plus one majority, which was terrifying to think about. And yet at the same time, I think that you, myself, and numerous other young people have seen a significant return and uptick to religion and return to Christ, which
Right.
warms my heart. But I know that we are very much indeed a strong but a small minority of people that are upholding to their respective faiths. And I was just reading not too long ago, and I may do a video on this, but I was reading about a Christian martyr, the new martyr Valeru, and he was a priest who was imprisoned in the Soviet Union, and he tended services to the men in the gulags. And one of the things that he had said about, well, how do we overcome the system? How do we overcome this Gnostic atheism that has, controlled us for so long in these years? He says a Christian elite, and the importance of having people that are willing to go out and practice what they preach or what they believe in out in the community, not to be warriors in the sense that they're going to take up arms, but to illustrate that there is something better than what is currently out there. And I think that's something that we're going to have to be called to do.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of very interesting points made there. Towards the end, the idea that we need to have Christians that are examples first before anything else. Once upon a time, that was understood to be, just that's what a Christian is an example to everyone else, a light in the darkness, if you will, someone that points to Christ. Once upon a time, especially in the United States, there was a culture of you would know someone is a Christian by how they acted, just because
know a man by his fruits.
Well, yeah, but like this isn't like some sort of you save yourself, sort of just work really hard and God will like you. It's just more that there were once upon a time generations of people that so loved Christ and everything that Christ taught, that they wanted other people to come to it. And how do you do that? You show that, the way that Christ teaches is better by acting it out. Once upon a time, that was just a larger portion of society than the non-existent one that we have now. So it's that's a point that I think oftentimes gets lost, both by Christians and by their critics, because you'll see a lot of Christians right now that want to skip that step and go straight to, we need the based Christian theocracy right now without having the manpower to back it up. And then you will also have critics that will say, I thought Christianity is supposed to be based. Why are you all just acting out this sort of, Christian lifestyle instead of taking up arms to, take back the Holy Land? There's that middle step there where you actually have to act Christian to bring people into Christianity. That happens before you get the Christian society, funnily enough. And then the other point as well, when we were mentioning sort of like the pervading idea of gnosis and pleasure and eschewing everything that was once good, your physical body, everything that would bring us to that. Also, once upon a time, there was an idea that you couldn't just get something for free, especially not pleasure or anything that was seen as more of a vice. It was always viewed as some sort of great trade-off or a bargain with the devil or something like that, depending on what it is you were trading or what it is you were going after. That's also something that has been completely forgotten about today, because if you look back through older writings, basically every time the protagonist or the character of interest seeks after pleasure or some sort of boon or something like that, it's basically always under the pretext that he will have to pay dearly later. Fiction, nonfiction, whatnot else, any narrative that was written by humans. There was always like some sort of reckoning that would come later, even if it wasn't explicitly, judgment. That's something that I have not seen basically at all from anyone in the modern day, bar from like a few people that are kind of online. Everything's just viewed as like, well, some people, don't have to pay for anything. That's just the wicked system. And then, and there's other people that just think there is no paying for anything at all. You can get this stuff for free. And yeah, perhaps you'd have thoughts on those two things, because I figure that would play very well into the main subject here of, why is everything just disintegrating? Perhaps it's because there's no sense of justice, and also because there's no sense of actually living out your ideals.
Well, I think it's that, but when you had mentioned that people do things and they don't expect that there's to be a cost, or that there isn't supposed to be, your recompense or the other shoe to drop, that mindset is very much gone. And I think that one of the reasons why people who are perhaps more politically dissident leaning, or at least more to the right than they may have been 5 or 6 years ago, is because we've been operating what a lot of people call the civic religion, or the narrative of how the state operates, our idea of what is the national myth that keeps the nation together, what is the thing that allows us every 4 years to go to the ballot box and vote against our prospective existential enemies that we've been propped up to tell, and say that, oh, the person on team blue is our enemy. That it would allow us to more or less get along for the last 60 to 70 years, that allowed us to ignore certain irregularities, like things in 2012 or 2016 or 2000 or 2020. But that is a myth. It's a created myth that allows us to believe into it and participate into it without any real basis in reality or truth. And I think that the mythological operating costs of keeping everyone under this cohesive story, while everyone wants to either change the story, subvert the story, or insert their own, ethnic hatred, narcissism, what have you. We can kind of tell that mythological, can't we all just get along, guys, myth, the cost to become so great that people are watching it fracture. And now the consequences and cost of that myth are being very much apparent on screen before us right now. And we're getting to see it play out in real time. And that's one aspect of it. I think that people will pursue all kinds of earthly delights and pleasures and not realize what that kind of cost is until usually it's far too late. And others, I think, are well aware of the consequences and are now trying their best to warn them. I think the best example of that we see on social media are the individuals that have detransitioned, because anytime that I see one of those unfortunate souls, come out, detransition, and do a video or talk about what they've experienced, people will viciously attack them as if they are apostates to their own religion. It's, when a 23-year-old woman who now looks like a 5'4" Norwooding balding man is complaining about what, she was lied to believe in, and people are saying, well, actually, you're just ugly, or you're genetically predisposed to look like that. That's the sort of thing that we're dealing with in terms of consequences, or people not believing that there are consequences. The best example, I also think, is the paradox of declining female happiness, that we've spent decades upon decades liberating people, quote unquote, from social norms and traditions that have existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. And, at that same time, in this wake of liberation, women have progressively gotten unhappier in the West, more unhappy than they've ever been in recorded history. So I think that there's something to say that this global antichrist system that we are currently under attack from, it illustrates that you won't be happy either spiritually or physically in the realms that they offer you in these temptations.
Right, and that's the detransitioning group is a very interesting one, because I feel ever so slightly psychopathic, but whenever I come across them, the only thing that I can think of, most of those individuals, once upon a time, they would have gladly had my life ruined had you pointed any of the stuff out to them, and now they finally come to realize everything that they were being told. Um, there is a part of me that finds it very hard to have sympathy, but usually I will eventually muster some up. I'm not entirely psychopathic, but it's I can't help but feel just the it's so naturally intuitive that things come at a cost, that whenever someone has a very tragic story because they did not realize there was a cost associated with what they were doing, I find it very difficult to sympathize. But this is a very interesting group for the purposes of the conversation, simply because the only reason they're there is because there are no more real social bonds. They're unhappy because everything that we have used to destroy those social bonds, our society, communities, families, and all this other stuff, did not make them happy, but in fact made it worse. There's a group of people warning them the entire time, and they weren't listening for whatever reason. They eventually came to realize everything that those groups told them about, at which point, everyone that they associated themselves with starts to turn on them, as you said, and now there's very likely no place for them to go. Their body's basically ruined. Where do they fit in? It's a strange sort of outcast now. It's a microcosm, if you will, of everything that we're seeing elsewhere, because it's not just this group where those factors are present. You can very likely find them probably in your next generation if they ever come to see the consequences of their actions. You have a whole generation of people, not that are detransitioning, but that have taken very costly actions, especially in their youth. And they are, there's going to be some sort of judgment somewhere along the line, some sort of cost that they're going to come across. People are going to be able to say, I warned you. There's going to be some sort of lasting impact that's going to make them not be able to integrate or fit in, or build a functioning society, and we're going to see the consequences of it. Or perhaps you have a different perspective.
No, I think that I'd be pretty on point with all of those things. Is that there is going to be and I mean they've paid a very ultimate cost. I mean they're sterilized, their bodies are irreparably changed and damaged. They're going to have to deal with it. I do agree with you that probably at one point in time those individuals would have had no problem doxing me or doing anything like that in the name of being a part of that social in group. But in some ways, I also view them as prodigals that, they've kind of come to terms with their consequences and actions. And I think we can only pray for them. And I know that, it's very difficult. I think that's a challenge that any Christian faces, is knowing to pray for our enemies, especially when they're as evil or as they can be as they are. But I think that that's an example of what kind of cost that's going to come from. I think that we're also kind of witnessing it now because, well, at what cost are people willing to enjoy their progressive social mores and social agreeableness if it comes at the cost of what it comes to you? It's that old line that every Republican is a libertarian or a Democrat that got mugged, and I think that there's a little bit of that's coming in play. But instead of just getting mugged on the street, you're getting mugged of your body and soul, and I think that is what we're going to see for quite a bit of time. Because, like you had mentioned in your video about the Zoomers, I mean, people are so desperate to search for meaning that they'll cling on to anything, and they'll go through every ideology, they'll go through every religion. And when that little bit of dopamine that comes with the, zealotry of the converted, then all of a sudden, they're nothing more than a burnt out husk or a shell of a human being that will go along with anything and not really have anything else to go with them. So whether that ends up leading them to be another porn addicted soul or something else, I mean, it becomes very apparent. And the horror stories I hear from, I've got three teachers, two teachers, and one of them is like a teacher, but he's also a sort of a psychiatric assistant to a lot of things. And they all work within schools. And the things I hear about middle schoolers of tomorrow, right, the kids of tomorrow, the adults of tomorrow, the future leaders, as people like to say, is downright terrifying. And I think that, in an age where you're seeing an increased level of single parenthood and single parent households, the lack of fathers, and all facets of society where the media has feminized men to no degree. Men are more effeminate than they've ever been before. That to illustrate an example of masculinity in the Christian sense, it behooves us more than ever to be those kind of examples.
And it's very interesting that you mentioned that specific demographic because our guest last week, completely independent of you, I presume, uh, especially because I believe he said his fiance was a school teacher, had mentioned the exact same demographic with the exact same point, except I think he used slightly harsher language. I think we ended up calling the children feral at the
That'd
end
be
of the
pretty fair.
conversation. So hopefully the audience is understanding that there might be an issue with the coming generations just because you know every single conservative in public life, despite the fact they have had no impact on actually fixing the issue, has been talking about how one day all of these family divisions, social destruction, getting rid of these institutions and the old way of doing things will come back to hurt us. Pat Buchanan might come to mind for someone that was a bit more prophetic than some of the more vague generalizations you would get elsewhere. Um, you do actually see that in your newer generations where they have been raised by people that wore masks for their most formative years, that have been raised by iPads, that don't actually physically or verbally interact with anyone next to them. They don't play toys in the sandbox or in the on the playground. They play on the iPad with flashing colors and a sterile screen. Well, sterile, but it's a this will have consequences because you add all of those new factors into the old ones. Usually they have some sort of broken household. The father is usually gone, or the mother is usually gone. They have no church. They have no traditional social institutions with which to raise them. They have no standards. They're not going to really have economic prosperity like you see with the millennials or the Zoomers. There is going to be a hellish generation that is going to come about, which we have talked on this channel about before. Now, with all of that being said, you did mention the religious aspect of it, where in the search for meaning, younger people in the younger generations, or even some of the older ones, will flip through a variety of religious traditions, ways of life, and whatnot. They'll try it out for a while, get the zealous converts dopamine, and then once that fades, they won't stick with the commitment, or have an actual conviction for it. They will just go on to something else. This is a point that many people have made, and it's something you can see even back to the baby boomers, where you had like the attraction to Buddhism and Shintoism and all this other stuff. And then when that didn't work out, it was New Age mysticism. And then when that didn't work out, it was apparently Satanistic pedophilia. But you can see this in multiple facets of society. I'm very interested to hear you speak on this issue specifically, because the denomination or the faith that you are converted to is notorious for attracting these types of people. And you obviously don't strike me as one that is one of those types of converts. You don't strike me as one that absolutely despises them. And you usually have a very even-tempered opinion on the issue. So Eastern Orthodoxy, Zoomer converts, what's going on there? What's the state of the game? Are they good? Are they bad? Is the whole thing being destroyed from the inside out? Are the cradle Orthodox bad? Give us the rundown of it, just because I don't know if you've noticed, but not many people are actually Orthodox. Even given our online presence, I'm pretty sure that a majority of my audience are not Eastern Orthodox. But I can guarantee you, we probably all know the meme of the person that is converted to Orthodoxy and has become a sort of a modern Puritan, which I'm not using as a pejorative, but yeah.
Well, sure, right. The meme is very much alive in that essence, and I think kind of what kicks it off is that it is sort of that a substrate of what the New York Times did that article on, is like weird Catholic Twitter. The internet is not where you go to find religion. You go by going to a church of whatever respective choice that you have made to find God in whatever way that you find that he comes to you. In regards to me, I do make it a point to tell you people that I didn't find it through Twitter or some based meme stash or whatever. I had found it through exploring other churches. I had visited a Lutheran church that wasn't far from me, amidst an Anglican, Pentecostal, Church of Christ, etc. I went to a Catholic church, but I had found that I could not yet leave or be found very moved, as if I was called it, like I was home when I had first experienced liturgy. The thing though about that meme, or about sort of the ortho bro convert of the Western, kid that finds it, is that the catechesis traditionally it's 3 years. Although most times you'll see it to be 1 to 2 years, depending on where you're at. And that typically does a very good job of weeding out the kind of overly zealous, or dare I say, LARPing individuals that you might see on Twitter. There are plenty of people in my parish that are within their 20s. Most of them are married with children that are looking to find community and are looking to find the what we believe to be the fullest version of the Christian faith. I don't mean to cause any sort of, I try my very best not to avoid or get engaged in sectarian conflict, but it's what it is. There are more children than there are Zoomer people or younger millennials in our church, which is always wonderful. And the young people that I do find that are here are looking for something that is Christian focused and Christian oriented. And there is examples in which the lives of saints, the lives of the church itself and its history, have demonstrated how to survive in difficult times. And I don't mean just say trials and tribulations they'd undergone during communist rule, but also during times of great Christian persecution in the early years of the church. I think that gives us a very good example to look forward to from now. I've been recently reading, Eusebius's history of the church, the first 300 years, really after the book of Acts up until the time of Nicaea. And it was just this amazing, detailed history and account of families and names and individuals that had survived. And I think people are looking for that sense of connection and strength during a time where there is great fragmentation, not just on religious lines, but also on the grounds of cultural fragmentation, people losing friends over religion or politics, and that they come to an understanding that really the only way to succeed through anything, and the prayer I did before I hopped on the stream, is the prayer I do before any stream or any work that I about to do, is that Christ had said with thy most pure lips, for without me ye can do nothing, and having embraced these words I fall down before thee, to help me to complete thyself this work in which I'm about to do. And to me, that's what it matters. I practice it. I'm there as often as I can. I get lessons from elders and people that are around me 3 times a week, whether it's my traditional catechism class, one with my subdeacon, or my iconography teacher, whom I've learned so much about, and great respect for history and the sacredness of what we do. I get the meme, but I like to think that those who are very serious about it aren't going to be the ones that meme about it. And I think that that's a very important delineation to make.
Right, and there seems to be you can tell them by their fruits. So it seems to me that the people most serious about these about any form of Christianity is not usually the one to go on Twitter to see, basically tell them how much more pious they are. That's not to say you can't go onto Twitter to say muckrake a denomination or something, but there's a certain type of person that will go on after converting and basically just say everyone else but like the 4 people I know are going to hell because we have the full truth, and for basically the reasons that I've determined using some sort of excerpts, you all do not have the full truth and are thus misled by Satan or the Antichrist or something like that.
We see that all the time.
There's and that's the hyperbolic form of what you would see with someone that goes on to Twitter after converting to X denomination, and then suddenly they're saying, this practice that everyone has seen as normal for the last 600 years is actually deeply sinful, and we need a renewal of people to completely eschew said practice. Which
I work in sales, not management. It's not my place to be the judge of who goes to hell and who doesn't.
Right. Right. I hadn't heard that, but that's very good. But the type of people that are usually interested will not go and do that. Usually because the type of people that are usually interested in the real Christianity know that they themselves are not in a position to tell people how much more pious they are, because they're not pious. It is very difficult to be pious, like truly pious in today's world, just because you are hit by needless distractions, you are hit by needless childishness, You are hit by, soft pornography if you go out to like even out in public in like a college campus, say. You're hit by basically everything that would be trying to lead you astray. And most people, by virtue of not being raised into a proper Christian household, I think that's the majority of people at this point, don't exactly have the spiritual fortitude or maturity to resist most of that, at least mostly. So, there's not going to be, sudden mystical piety, especially not if you find it through Twitter.
Yeah.
All of that being said, this is not a discouragement. It's just that that's not. I would say that's not the main goal. You don't want to be outwardly pious in the first week of conversion, usually because you won't be, and you are going to be, building yourself up for a stricter form of judgment. Usually after going out and advertising that, but you also, there is more to Christianity than just piety, despite the fact that is something that you should be getting as a result of properly being a Christian. It's that whole forgiveness and devotion part that you should be really focused on, rather than how you appear to everyone else, even though that is definitely a part of it. All of that being said, though, the community that you describe is one that I'm sure most of the religious people in our audience would be familiar with, the one where people are there because they actively want to learn, they actively want to seek what is real. I don't know if that's because of the audience that we have being more dissident, and thus they're naturally seeking the truth, even if it's not what popularly is seen as the truth, or if we had done that already and then became dissidents. I don't quite know. But that seems to be a community that would have been more common maybe centuries ago, like not even 2 centuries ago. Like, this seems like something you would see in the 15, 14, 1600s, not the 18 and 1900s, where people start to have consensuses and all this other stuff. And there also seems to be something much more wholesome about it. Families that will come together because they seek the truth, that will eat together, they will go about their days together, they will teach each other. Obviously, just because most people don't go to church anymore, they don't have that. But I don't even think this is something you would see, 200 years ago, in most Christianity, most of Christendom, at least in Europe. From what I can read, it seems that there was a time of great comfort and of a lack of hardship. Why would we need to come together? You just go for the ritual. You maybe have a feast afterwards or something like that. Donate the tithe, and then you're a good Christian. So perhaps you would disagree, but because I know my experience is not universal. But it seems to me that there is good to come out of all of this because, for the first time in centuries, we have sort of revived this, tradition of getting families together to seek truth, teach it, confess it, be with each other, and be connected to each other that, really has not genuinely existed for quite a long time. Perhaps you disagree, though.
Well, I think that we're seeing it more now than ever, especially I think COVID really did kickstart all of that, whether it was the renewed emphasis on school choice or that parents were finally exposed to see just what on earth their parents were teaching or what their teachers were teaching their kids. I think that there has been, to maybe call back to an American tradition, there has been another great awakening in ways in which people want to seek alternatives to the current system that they're under, which is mainly some form of secular materialism that has been taught in our schools and has been really the propagated form of it all. And I've been consuming less the more and more I've been in attendance with my church and engaged in prayer. I don't want to find my time, watching another stream or having people tell me to go watch this at 2 times speed. I cannot stand that. I think that's really bad for your attention span. But I think that you're right that we haven't seen it for some time. And I think that we're seeing a return from that in its own form. It's not perfect, or it's not an exact copy of what may have been around 200 to 300 years ago, but it is certainly around in a point in time where we can use the technology that we have as a tool that can get us in the direction that we need to help others, to serve the Lord, to help out the church, and to help out our community members. I mean, I don't brag about what I do or anything like that, but I mean, like, the I was available. Like, hey, like I don't have any, like I'm not married or anything. I can have free time. So if someone asked me and said, hey, can you take care of my elderly mom and my dog while I'm out during surgery, I can do that with no problem. And I think that you're seeing that return in a lot of denominations and a lot of churches. And I think that that is something that we can look as not as the end all be all alternative. By all means, it won't be. I think in some regards, because we still have to deal with the state, we still have to deal with outsiders. But I think that it is the thing that we should be working towards building more of, because you're as good, like your network is your net worth, as people like to say at all those like really cringe sort of business networking events. But there is a lot of truth to it, and if we don't have the communal parish relations, if we don't have our religious relations that we do have with our kinsmen and those that are in our respective churches, then you're going to be up a creek without a paddle, and things are going to get really bad when things get worse.
Very good. And this is probably the part that I was most looking forward to out of the vague ideas of where I wanted to take this discussion. So this sort of religious tradition of families helping each other, gathering together, eating together, receiving sacrament together, helping each other, everything that we would normally assume as good to happen in a congregation. What are the consequences of no longer having that in the wider culture? It's a very vague and open-ended question. So, I understand. I'm not asking for the answer. I just, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Why is it bad? And we will go from there, because this is particularly why I wanted to have you on.
I'm immediately we have a reader at our church who helps read the hours and parts of the epistles, but he's a much older gentleman. He's sort of retired from the role and let the younger men start doing it. But he says, one of the consequences of a lack of communal life or a high trust society is that we just don't beat the crap out of our kids anymore. He's telling the story about how his father would receive a call from his teacher asking for permission if he could just like whoop him, and he's like, yeah, I don't have a problem with it unless you want me to come down there and do it myself. And he's like, no, I trust you, go ahead and do it. I think of that just humorously, but I think that we, for some reason, like the religious individuals and sort of just proper high trust society enjoyers and appreciators had lost was that very, like, they took this cringe phrase of it takes a village to raise a child, which I think there's a lot of truth to it, but they've made it this thing where actually no, it takes a village to take your child and castrate it in order to be part of
they use it to the expense of the parent.
Yeah, of course. Anything to deny the parent it's their actual rights to parent their child and to rear their child as they so believe to be fit. That's what they mean by it. We have to take away parental rights. Whereas not really, the old and traditional way would have been, no, we understand how these parents would have raised to their children and we want them to behave even when they're not there. Integrity is what you do when nobody's looking and all that. I think that one of the things that has been the consequence of it has been this emboldened sense of youthful rebellion. I know that Academic Agent has sort of talked about the invention of the teenager really being this product and facet of the 20th century. Because, 14, 15, 13-year-olds would have all been either working under their father's respective business, they would have been reared in schools, or even for those that were talented enough, they may have been enrolled in university much earlier, which would, of course, been under the guide of a religious leader. I just think about even here in the United States, some of our oldest universities are being rebranded to remove the very explicit Christian founding that was related to these churches, which is depressing to think about. But nevertheless, that's where we are. And so I really do think that those are some of the consequences we've seen by that abandonment is that we've thrown out the proverbial baby with the bathwater. And in turn, we're witnessing the consequences that the child that you threw out is now this feral, ravaging being that is out to destroy everything that had once done it. Because as the other phrase goes, right, the child will burn down the village just to feel its warmth. And in turn, through progressivism or through this global antichrist system, we've thrown out the child, and it is now this feral ranging mongrel that wants to get revenge. And in order to feel some semblance of warmth, it will take everyone down with it. That's why we see articles from Politico that says the LGBTQ, ABC, BBQ plus community is all going to be one of the fastest growing voting blocks in the history of the United States. And that should raise anybody's eyebrow and be like, this thing that is traditionally less than a statistically significant amount of the US population is now supposed to be 25% of the voting age population in coming elections. Something has gone terribly wrong.
It's really weird how a genetic trait can suddenly go from 0.1% of the population to like 25% of the population in one generation. It's really strange how that happens.
Well, I think about like the sociology and the study behind suicide contagions. That when unfortunately someone does that horrible act to themselves, other people feel inclined to do it. And I think that we're seeing that on a much more destructive and industrial scale, because it's a lot more profitable to mutilate them and keep them alive through other means than it would be to just straight up murder them. And I think that that's something that we have seen in the abandonment of faith and community above all else.
Very good. So, or, well, not the content, but the direction here that we're talking about. So, the LGB block, LGBT plus the alphabet block, and the sort of suicide contagion. This is a very interesting one because it's a very common talking point to discuss sort of, well, obviously it's social pressure and there's a special status awarded to anyone that takes up the mantle. You only really have to go after that B in there. You don't actually have to commit to anything. That's why most women go after it and whatnot else. It's a form of identity that they can take part in. We've probably all heard that discussed at some point in time before. But I have not actually heard it compared to the suicide contagion phenomenon. And that makes quite a lot of sense because, I've always been trying to square the whole, I don't see people reacting to incentives very much anymore. It's always dopamine and stimulation, all that, which itself is an incentive granted, but it's not what you would traditionally consider incentives to get people to do things like that. That's just base instinct or reaction. But they also go after this LGBT label quite aggressively, presumably because of the status award within the identity, which is a traditional incentive. So something doesn't line up there. And the idea that it is just the sort of social pressure that you would get sort of like suicide, that there's like a mental barrier or a community barrier that's broken there to just suddenly make it much easier to go after. That makes a lot of sense, and I haven't actually considered it like that before. So the solution that I would offer to all of us, and it's going to come as a shock to everyone, is to reinstate the traditional authority of the church and society. And the only reason I bring that up right now is because at once upon a time, that was what effectively socially condemned suicide, either rightfully or wrongfully. You can discuss that on your own, whether or not suicide is an unforgivable or a damnable sin. That's not what we're here to discuss. But it was usually the church that would so socially ostracize anyone that did commit suicide that it was virtually unheard of for a lot of communities. Compare that to now where, I'm sure you and I both know people that have committed suicide, at least from our classes, let alone someone that's from in the nearby region. So, one of the strangest things that I have seen people on the dissident right, and usually it tends to be Europeans, and you can make of that what you will, is that they will say, you can't just bring back some form of Christianity and expect your problems to go away, because that does not solve the fundamental issues of racial demographics. It doesn't solve the fundamental issues of men being, effeminate. It doesn't solve all of these issues, which is absolutely strange to me. Because once upon a time, Christian governance was seen as making sure that your people were as best off as they could be, and there were clear delineations of who were your people and who were not. There were clear markers of, Christians are to have respect for their homelands, their fatherlands, all this other stuff. That's not just something unique to Germans. Just about every Christian society had a concept of, this land is for us. It was given to us by our ancestors, and it's for our descendants. As for the role of men, it was understood that Christian men were supposed to be the best they could possibly be because one, you have the Holy Spirit. God is omnipresent, doesn't just suddenly stop at a skin border. Um, you have to take care of yourself. You also are commanded to take care of yourself explicitly, even if you didn't want to, because of that reason. But you also were supposed to do so because you had Christian women with which you were to make families with, and as you were supposed to be masculine because they were feminine, and vice versa, they were feminine because the men were masculine. Uh, you know, where that went wrong in the cycle there, I'm not here to speculate on. But you also had other issues as well, like suicide being much less rampant because the church had social power. You had checks on the sort of degeneracy that would happen in government, so you couldn't have, say, a cabal of active pedophiles legislating your laws, because if that were to happen, you would have a religiously stoked mob at your doorstep tomorrow with pitchforks and shotguns and ropes and whatnot else, ready
The good
to
old
make sure,
days.
ready to make sure that you weren't legislating laws as a pedophile. Um, it seems to me, and perhaps you have a different perspective because this is where I tend to break with people in our sphere, that bringing back religious communities having social power would be exactly the solution that we're gearing towards. But perhaps you could set me correctly on where I've gone wrong there.
Well, heaven forbid that people that are agreeant with the spiritual and the teleological basis for how one should live a moral and Christian life not work together to take care of these issues. I think that there are going to be problems that, I think that a magical transition back to, say, church leadership, or that being primarily the governing moral body above all else, whether that be the church or even, I mean, we had blasphemy laws in the United States, and I think people forget that these things used to happen and that they were actually enforced.
Right? Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Like
eh,
blasphemy laws on the state level until at least the Civil War.
yeah, I
Like
mean,
that's
most of them died by the compromise in the 1870s that ended Reconstruction, but which is depressing as all can be. But I think most people, that probably do rage against it to some degree, do recognize that we are going to be dealing with a fundamentally different class of people. We are not the men of 1789. We're not the men of 1879. We aren't even the same men of 1979. We are dealing with certain intractable problems, whether that's our issues with food, the fact that the powers that be are very much more entrenched than they ever have been before. We have been dethroned for quite some time, all forms of Christianity, I think, except whatever heresy they like to call themselves, as, trying to tell people to ignore St. Paul and ordain a woman. I think that those are some issues that are going to be for our age that I think a lot do just check off as insurmountable. But I always have to chuckle at that because, I mean, at any point in time, whether it was during the Reformation period or the wars that had followed in between afterwards, or even just the early years of Roman and pagan persecution, Christians survived when they weren't completely in power. And they had managed to do quite well, even if that meant, as Paul writes in his epistles, that services for your home, a home church for the large and the wealthy estates that could have space and areas in their own households dedicated to religious services. I do think that we are going to take some time. It won't be happening overnight. That we still have to deal with the porn industry. We still have to deal with the fact that most of Gen Z has some kind of addiction to it or is overly online. We would have to deal with the fact that there are certain people that just hate Christianity and hate, the white Protestant Christian population that happens to be in the majority in the United States, and they'll happily do anything to subvert that. And I'll leave that for your audience to tell what I mean by that. But I mean, things like the Hays Code or moral code in media, I think, was a good place to look at. But even when we are in times where that seems an insurmountable thing to overcome, I've said from the very beginning, since I've made this channel, that any aspect of our cultural conflicts, our religious conflicts, must be viewed within the lens of the Reconquista. It will not happen in our lifetimes. I would love to be proven wrong on that, but I do think that it will be an intergenerational conflict. That, for me, my viewpoint is that if the world is a slightly less paused place by the time my grandchildren are born, then I know that I have planted the vine and fig tree that they will sit under and not be afraid. But I think that a lot of the naysayers, I think, one, are also coming at it from a non-fundamentally Christian lens. We see that especially with our colleagues out there that just take the most Talmudic view of Christianity possible. Um, and then at the same time, I think that it's also because we do enjoy our modern comforts. One of my favorite, this is the one meme that I really do like, is that sort of this like intellectual soy jacket guy's like, well, I thought I was supposed to be based now that I've converted, that I could own with my theological arguments. And he's yelling at him. He says, I told you to take up my cross and follow me. And so I think that those are, I don't think that you're wrong to want those things and to take the necessary steps to improve them. I think that it will be a little more fragmented and decentralized until the appropriate amount of power can be, accumulated in order for us to take back these institutions, or at least to take back parts in which govern culture and infect the mind the most.
Right, yeah. So the Reconquista view is perfect, and I'm surprised that I have not heard of that, nor have I thought about. Because, and it's a perfect analogy as well, because obviously the people that started the Reconquista from like the foothills in the north of Spain, with that tiny sliver of land that they have, wouldn't be completed for at least another like 3 or 4 generations, maybe 5, if I remember correctly. So that is an absolutely splendid analogy. And it really does have to be the mindset that everyone has to be in. Because obviously there is no one that is really coming to save us. You're not going to bar the second coming happening sometime in our lifetimes today. We're not really just going to have some person that is our guy that is going to come and actually fix the most egregious evils of society that have sprung up in the last few generations. It's just not going to happen. Things are going to continue to get worse until people actively make them better. And it does basically have to be us. That burden falls to us because we're the only ones that see the evils and want to fix them. So, this obviously has to be a generational conflict, as you mentioned in the Reconquista anecdote. It's a great mindset here. And hopefully everyone that is watching this does not come away from this thinking that we are discouraging people from being based and trying to convert to Christianity, because that obviously everything that we derive, we hope is correct and good. It's just that that's not the purpose of Christianity, as I'm sure you've heard many Christians say. And the purpose of Christianity is Christ. Go figure. That's what should be at your core, and then everyone else follows. So hopefully the takeaway there is that there's more than just being based, and not Ryan and Matt told us not to try to be based in Christianity. Don't go away thinking that. But the main issue here, and I slightly blame video games for this, is that there's an idea among people, especially in the right, that if someone tells you that you have to like live out what you are doing, and then eventually we will win as a result of that, generational conflict, bringing people to Christ, all of this other stuff. They think that there is a direct proportional ratio to the amount of work that they will put into that, and the amount of benefit, or the amount of what's the word I'm looking for? The amount of outcome that they expect to receive from that. Like you're filling up a meter. Like if I'm at these percent levels of work, or of this example making, or following this moral philosophy, then I'll expect these returns and results as time goes on. Which, if you were to turn the actual state of things into a video game, I don't think anyone would want to spend 4 generations of their family playing out this moral philosophy to try to see the results later. Which is whenever you play video games, obviously there is a time commitment that you put into it. There is a direct return for whatever you put in. It all has to be based on some sort of algorithm or random chance. That's not reality. Hopefully you and I are making this abundantly clear. There is generational warfare here. It is not going to happen in your lifetime or even your children's lifetime necessarily, that these things will start to actively turn towards us. And this is only going to be brought about by living out a life that you will not see the full benefits of in the lifetime of even your children, potentially. Obviously, you will see benefit, but it will not be the full society that you would that you would read about in your history books. That had to come from somewhere, and it was originally generations of people living out a lifestyle that then grew into a civilization. Um, you know, obviously, then as a result of living out that lifestyle, you would have rulers that would come along, convert to it, that already lived out the lifestyle, that thought it was a good idea despite not converting to it, and then would put that into law, put that into the moral code. They themselves would live it out. It would spread from the courts, or from the royal court itself down to the rest of the population that wasn't following it, and then you have your society. Just because we had that society at one point and are now looking to have it again does not change the fact that this has to happen one more time. We are firmly out of power. We are culturally out of power. We are probably, basically a minority at this point, religiously and culturally and racially. You have to do the exact same thing. Not because this is some strategy that some man came up with and that worked once, so we have to do it again, but because that's what we're commanded to by God. You live this out, and you can read any of Paul's epistles. You can read about his accounts of converting the Roman guards. You can read the later early church father accounts about Rome converting to Christianity. They didn't stay these isolated, weird desert communities for too terribly long. You will live this thing out. You will be righteous, and others will join you. And this will take an extremely long amount of time, but it will have to happen if you want to win eventually. So, any thoughts on sort of any elaborations on the generational conflict, Prude?
Well, if you want to also make it understandable, not just in maybe say the lens of how video games have affected things in our viewpoint, take a look at it from the viewpoint of the enemy and consider your relationship with your grandparents or the world that your grandparents grew up in, and realizing that it took that generation, your parents' generation, your generation, and the generation that has come after you to get us to where we are now, or even earlier if your great-grandparents are still alive and are still with you. And think about all the work that had to be done to dismantle sort of what we would consider American traditionalism over the course of 4 generations to get us to where we are now. That took time. And just in the way that the enemy operates, the same thing is going to have to be for us. We need to have a time preference that realizes that, you're not going to receive an earthly gift. I mean, we will by, of course, uprooting our enemies and enjoying a much more Christian or traditionalist society. But, we were told in the Sermon of the Mount, about the things that we are supposed to do. And most importantly, to rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. There will be rewards here, but the one that you should be looking towards is the one that comes after this life, because that's what we are to prepare for. But I do think that you can't view it as just a level up thing sort of deal, but you should view it in the lens of you are going to get what you put into it. And if you only put in the bare minimum and you only show up on Sundays, you kind of just mumble your way through the service or whatever, you're not going to get much out of it. And, as Ryan and myself have said here and in other places, you don't go to church because it's based. You go to commune with the Lord and enjoy both, sacramental living and everything that comes within that and scripture. I think that all of those things are what you should be seeking, not just because, all the based right-wing trads are here or whatever. You're in it for the wrong reason if that's the case, and I hope that the Holy Spirit moves through you to maybe I do think that there is going to be a time and a place for us to realize and to work. And I think now is that time to recognize that our efforts from here on out are going to be it's going to be long term. And it's at the very end of my very first video 2 years ago and some change, that it's going to be like the Reconquista. It will take a very long time. But when people can look back at you and say thank you, either in prayer or visiting your headstone, then it will have been worth it in the end.
So I will play the opposition that we are invariably going to get as a result of saying this. So, are we just resigning? Are we basically just accepting the current system?
Of course not. I think that anyone here is going to tell you flat out that this is a rejection of the current system, and that even in other movements across other places that aren't Christian had also had some semblance of recognizing that things are not going to take time here, within their lifetimes to achieve victory. That it will take their sons or their forefathers and their sons' children to do what is necessary to root out evil or to root out a foreign occupation. And to say that, oh, we're to resign or to retreat into the hinterlands is quite the opposite. We must live that example, as the great martyr had said, and the new martyr had said, that we should be living out our lives as public examples, and to tell people that we do not fear the consequences of the examples of what that may be. And if that means imprisonment or worse, our lives, then so be it, because we have done what is necessary and what we are called to do. I am not resigned to anything about this system that I know is fundamentally evil. To sit back and let evil win is to tacitly endorse and to welcome evil into my doorstep, into my life. And that is how you lose both the seen and unseen warfare. And I don't think any Christian, regardless of church or denomination, would have any issue with that. We are not to resign. We are to live publicly, and we are to create the infrastructure through our faith that would allow people to have the alternative, which is the most welcoming and open alternative, which is the alternative of God and his kingdom, which is of this earth, but of not of this earth. And we should take that into consideration in all things that we do in terms of politics. One of the prayers that I do every night is just this sort of general prayer to the world that comes from the Athenites. And one of the things that we pray for is that we pray for our leaders that are in civil authorities and whatnot, that that the Lord may grant them the compunction and will to govern as Christians. And that is what we should be orienting ourselves towards, is that in the future we can govern as Christians, that we can lead as Christians, that we can lead our communities, our families, our faith, our church, and our neighbors around us the same way. Because if you don't set yourself as an example, then you're just some faceless neighbor next door. If you set yourself as an example that actually cares and speaks out against this debauchery, whether it's in school board meetings or it's at your city councilman and their 5 minutes of public comment, this does require effort, and it's going to require a little more effort than what people are used to. One of the biggest issues that I take with the internet overall isn't just the distance and emotions or intimacy, it's slacktivism. We are so open to just in liberals more especially, but at least they have the state to back up their violent actions. Hashtag bring back our girls, Coney 2012, all forms of slacktivism that had existed. That told people that, yeah, as long as you change your profile picture on Facebook with a little flag or whatever, or a black heart, then you've done your job and you've properly counter signaled whatever evil that is out there. Congratulations, But we're asking you to do a little bit more than that. Actually, we're asking you to do a lot more than that. And that doesn't mean that you're going to be resigned and let the system wash over you and take your soul.
Alrighty, and then the other annoying criticism that I get, that you are addressing these so beautifully that I think I can just let that one stand. So the other criticism that a lot of Christians get whenever they propose Christianity as a solution to the world's ills, could you imagine such a thing? Is they will say, well, you guys already believe that you've won in the end, so why even bother right now?
Sure, I mean, the gates of hell, hell will not prevail against the gates of the church. I mean, just, all those things that we say that we've won, death has been conquered, death has been defeated. Yes, that is true. Christ is risen from the dead, and death has been trampled down. All those wonderful things that we talk about. But that does not mean that upon this earth we can sit back and willingly let that pernicious servant swallow other countrymen and people whole, and take them down to hell with them. How many people do we know that suffer from great afflictions that torment them, and that because they don't have the proper avenue to treat that ill, they are left to find themselves despondent and resigned, and either double down on their sin and find themselves on that path to perdition and on that road to it and on their way to hell. That why would we want to sit back and not want to save them, or sit back and not want to tell them that there is a better way? Because yes, at the end, Jesus Christ wins. That's the best part. But that doesn't mean that on this earth there are going to be people that sin, or that our lives around us are going to be made worse by sin, and that we should be doing everything that we can to ensure that evil doesn't win out. And I think that when we say, oh, well, yeah, in our viewpoint, yes, Jesus Christ has won. Death has been defeated, and we all look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the age to come. But that doesn't mean that on this earth there are things that we can't do to make it better, to make it more Christ-like, to make things in a position that are making sure that people who are suffering aren't being suffering any longer. I mean, the church is a hospital, not just where we get the traditional sense of the Christian hospital, because that's where we get it from, but also that the church is a hospital for spiritual and social ills, and it always has been, and it still is to this day for those that still attend it. And so, yes, in our viewpoint, yeah, we've won, we've got the ultimate victory, but that doesn't mean that other people shouldn't taste the fruit of that victory as well.
Fantastic. And then finally, and we'll stop doing the the common criticisms, and we will get on to something a bit more just constructive. But aren't most church hierarchies subverted? It doesn't. If we're going to have Christianity back, what about the Pope, and what about all these other American churches, and what about this Orthodox church that baptized a gay couple or something like that? What about the subversion?
Well, I mean, this is where it behooves us, I think, to address those issues in the way that the church has outlined. I mean, every church has some method or methodology of calling out these issues and calling out these problems. I think that you have been a very prolific example of going very toe-to-toe with your synod and, dealing with pastors, and even I think it's even the president of the LCMS, right, has sort of taken issue with some of the criticisms and socially conservative pushback that he's gotten. It does not help that Dr. Cooper looks fails the physiognomy test. But
he's the president of a seminary.
Okay.
So,
but that's even worse.
You're not too far off in that the actual president has been facing criticisms from basically everyone. But yeah.
I mean, that's even worse that the head of a seminary is taking political issues, where Matt Walsh has called him out for it, which that was actually a delightful thing to watch. And I don't watch Matt Walsh at all, but to see that clip was interesting. But I think that you do have to call it out. And I mean, as any good priest or as any good religious leader will tell you, is that even when there is an affliction that is heading your church, whether that be leadership, whether that be a particular doctrinal viewpoint that may be historically viewed as heretical, that yes, in this instance, that there is great trials and tribulations in the church, but that doesn't mean that the church is still not a holy place, that still does not adhere with morals and values and teachings and doctrines that are still a net good for the church. I mean, there were still at times in the past, in the history of the church, whether it would be issues within Catholicism or debates within Protestant theology, or even when the church was still one before the schism in the East and the West, you still had to deal with things like Manichaeism, Arianism, the issues that had existed throughout multiple times, Barlism, all these things that had afflicted the church in their teachings, where some, bishops were considered heretical and had to be dealing with councils and things like that. I mean, even now we're seeing it with the Methodists that are about to split into two very different forms of Methodist churches over these issues. And what is deemed to be right. Paul outlines that very clear within Romans about the various sins that we are to avoid with regards to sexual immorality and things like that. Funny that people don't bring up Deuteronomy 23:1 when it comes to the trans issue, but that's a story for another time. But I mean, yeah, there's going to be paused things in all forms of Christianity. I think that it behooves all of us Christians, one, to name it and shame it, and two, to do our best to call it out, and to also just not live by heretical doctrines and social policies that are a net bad for not just Christianity, but society.
Fantastic. So, and that's entirely my point of view as well. You mentioned the Arians and the debate over the Trinity. And quite famously, they were a vast majority of the church at that time.
Like the first viral marketing campaign. I mean, they had their own little songs about it that were well known throughout those who lived in the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea. I mean, and still, they lost out by what is good to us in the Holy Spirit, as they've said since the first council in Jerusalem in the book of Acts, that was defeated. Not to mention a little bit of someone having a different interpretation of laying on hands to take care of that problem as well.
Right. And that's always at the very least something comforting to us. It's because something that a thought that might be in reaction to what we've said here is, we can put in all this effort, but there's no guarantee it would work. we have no precedent that this has worked before, but we do. It's in the Arians. They were a vast majority of the church. They had quite a lot of the leadership, and they still lost at the end to the righteous forefathers of Christians. So that's always something that's great to look for. And I said we wouldn't look at the chat until towards the end, but figured this is a good question here. Is the Prudentialist a Lutheran too? No, he is a Eastern Orthodox man.
Yeah. I am with the Orthodox Church of America, so no, I'm not a Lutheran.
There we go. So that would be we'll answer that question very quickly. So with all of that being said, perhaps we actually could just go through chat for just a second here, just because there's been a lot of good donations. There's been a lot of good discussions going on, and we only have at the very most 40 more minutes, though I'm sure you would probably need to get going slightly before that.
Gotta go record for November 7th on Monday, but we'll show that at the end.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to hype people up for the shilling, November 7th, absolutely do not look at our channels, do not look at our feeds, do not log on to the online world. Nothing is happening the day before the midterms. All of that Old Glory Club advertisements you've been seeing, it's a spoof. Don't look at anything. Don't believe your lying eyes. So for €2, monophthalmus, one of those.
Monophthalmos is how I usually go with it.
Monophthalmus, okay. Yeah, forgive me. Greek origin words. And
which is funny because he's German.
Yeah, well, I can assure you this word is not German.
I know, but he is.
Says $1 for each tie. Thank you, sir. And yeah, we do have the sort of. We are both in our very formal suits and ties that we are, similar look to what we had at the U.S. event, which I am excited for the next one. I've been looking forward to it since we left the last one. We have $10 from Cringe Walker, who says, at its peak, the Iberian Caliphates were 70% Muslim, primarily from mass immigration from Syria and Iraq. The Visigoths diminished to minorities. Took centuries to go from 30% back to 90%. It was a long effort. So, obviously, there's a very great analogy there, and anyone that's been following me would know that I usually hate making analogies, but in this case, it's good because we actually need to prove that what we are advocating for can be done. It's not us just making some point about we're literally in post World War I Weimar, we're in the late Roman Republic. We've suggested ideas people want to know, has this been done before? We have multiple examples. This is also another one that includes the mass migration that you didn't see in the Aryan controversy. Quite famously, Spain, or in their former kingdoms, Aragon, Castile, Leon, Portugal, would expel these people. They Christianized the ones that were, originally in Iberia. The more Visigothic-looking ones, they would send people to colonies. They would basically kicked out, quite famously, some of the other Semitic religions there, or force them to convert. All of this has been done before at some point in time, and once again feeds perfectly into your setting about the Reconquista, which perhaps we should be using that branding more just as a group, just because that is perfect for what the situation is.
Well, Zamor tried in France, but it's a good label.
Well, we do have one advantage in that we are not the French.
Amen to that.
So we have $10 from Matt Ege. Pet theory: mark the patriarchal sea cities of various Ortho-Roman Catholic and Eastern Catholic churches on the map, and subverted or not is veritably a map of a certain treaty organization or not. So we look at the where the patriarchal sees are located on the map, and it will be a map of a certain treaty org. So where are the patriarchal sees for the Orthodox group? Would it be
mainly in Anatolia and Cappadocia? But I mean, now I'm gonna have to look it up. Patriarchal sees
would be Alexandria.
The churches specifically mentioned, and really at the end in Revelation. There's the 5 major episcopal sees that we know, which is Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. But I mean, then there's also, what was the pentarchy model prior to really separation. But I mean, that worked in those five seas. It covered the really the Mediterranean, the Aegean. But nowadays, I think about how Turkey and Greece are part of NATO, but I'm not referring to what specific treaty org that I'm thinking of. So hopefully he can comment and correct me, but I don't know which one he's referring to then in that regard.
Okay. Constantinople and Athens, for example, versus Moscow and Belgrade, etc.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely an east-west split there that we see sort of NATO versus with the Warsaw Pact, and even now with the CSTO. But I mean, those things are definitely going to exist. We still have to be cognizant, I think, of our geopolitical standing. I mean, anyone who's read The Clash of Civilizations by Huntington, right, is going to be aware that there's going to be differences in how Christianity exhibits itself in different countries and how that's been used as a cultural and political weapon. I mean, America's done the same, right? When it came to the Cold War, it's done it before, where even our propaganda films for World War II were the same way. There was that great one, and right as Pearl Harbor happened, we had a film about Sergeant York, and the whole big debate between the two was God, country, God, country.
Right.
I mean, it's just part of any nation's idea that it'll be animated by some religious spirit.
And I mean, that's whenever discussing Christianity, paganism, atheism, and all this other stuff comes down to a question of particularism versus universalism, I absolutely hate it. Because with Christianity, obviously you have universal truth, much like you would in, say, mathematics or geometry or, chemistry, physics, things that are just universal regardless of what culture, people, spirituality that you're a part of. Just because that is physical reality, we can, it is there. But it's also not culturally universal, which you can obviously see, comparing Anglican England at its height in the Victorian age to, Orthodox Russia at the same point in time. Also probably not near its height, I doubt many people would say, but definitely not near its end either. You have basically both aesthetics on very healthy display there. Both of them have very different cultural laws and organizations. The family structures are different. Russia would have the extended family. Most of England would have the proper or classical nuclear family. You would have completely different artworks that were being used, different church musics, different liturgies, slightly different on that last point, or at the very least until Tchaikovsky had his version of the liturgy made. But, there's very obviously not some sort of universality there in the fact that, races are discarded, nationality is discarded, culture is discarded, and heritage is discarded. It's just the truth that's adopted. And it's this reason that I'm absolutely astounded that whenever you talk to most of the people in our spheres, they treat Christianity as some sort of a homogenizing, terrifying force. Just because it's so very obviously not. You can look at literally anywhere throughout history that has become Christian, and they did not have to discard their heritage, their people, their nation, their borders, their home. They just accepted reality. Contrast that to something like Islam, which hilariously a lot of people in our spheres say is so based and awesome, where it quite literally takes root by usually Arabs pouring in from from their peninsula, into Egypt, North Africa, parts of Eastern Africa, Indonesia, and it literally has a book forcing people to adapt to Arabic custom. The debate here is just completely nonsensical to me. I don't know how anyone has ever looked at history and seen Christianity as a homogenizing force in that regard.
Well, and it's not even explicitly taught either within the early church for it to be a homogenizing force, especially once the church had been lifted up and was legalized, post 325. I mean, it's never been that way. And actually, Mr. Patriarch, our Alassian friend and YouTuber, has actually done a video on particularism versus universalism. And he cites the example of how in which the Austro-Hungarian Empire was governed and how Christianity was expressed there. The particularism of each race and culture was still expressed, but it was still headed and governed under sort of the Christian Austrian head and its monarchy. Like this wasn't, to say that it's this all-encompassing, homogenizing force that I can get along with a group of Ethiopian Christians is going to be, it's vastly just it's an incomprehensible take when looking at the history and the reality of both how people and cultures and ethnicities gather and operate together, and also how the faith is expressed.
Right, and turns out that there's a lot more to living than just theology.
Yeah.
Who could have guessed? But anyways, we do for $5 more. Cringewalker has said the Visigoths under the Caliphate, who organized as a minority, were called Mozarabs. Mozarabs. Sorry, I don't quite know the pronunciation for half of these. Worth reading how they operated, cut from the free Christians in the north. So these are the Christians that were not in the independent Christian kingdoms, but were under the Caliphate, and they had to organize themselves, much like we're seeing now. I might add, under a very hostile system, and still didn't go extinct. So I would say for anyone that likes to blackpill or doom post or anything like that, it is very rare for a group of people to just go completely extinct in history. Very rarely does that happen, and that's why we can point to very specific and great examples of that happening. Is because there's only a handful of them. Things will change over time, over the course of like millennia. Not what we're seeing right now, but very rarely under an invasion or something like that does an entire group of people just get completely driven to extinction. You even still have places in northern Africa that still bear the resemblance of the pre-Arabic invasion. So like even that under one of the more repressive or extreme regimes, the culture and even some of the genetics still lives on. The state of the West in Britain or the United States or continental Europe, it's not beyond saving, and nowhere near is it beyond saving. In fact, many people in the West before under oppressive and destructive regimes have come back from much worse. There's no need to despair, which is usually why whenever I point out the issues of the society today, I will preface it at the end. This is not meant to despair or drive you away from it. It's just pointing out, this is what we have to deal with. Perhaps you have something to
add? Just the phrase that St. Paisios has said is to keep thy mind in hell and despair not. So as black pilling or as any of these things may be, know that there is something worse. Keep that in your mind and despair not about what you have to do.
Perfect. And then we also have from Cringewalker for $5 more. One positive note to keep to heart. Once the goal of Reconquista was shared by Goths and Mozarabs, still have no clue, they ceased diminishing and began to flourish. So,
Are you saying that once people are united behind a positive vision, they're going to start flourishing, Cringewalker? Say it ain't so.
I was just about to say that. I have been absent from basically every discussion or debate that we've had over positive vision, despite making, posts and jabs from the sidelines on like Telegram and Twitter. But I have, from the beginning, still been very firmly in the need for a positive vision, just because, we can tear down all that we want to, but that is what our enemies do. You do not want to make your foundation in tearing things down. You do need to build something, otherwise it's worthless.
Well, like that and you don't want whatever takes its place. Like this is the thing. This is that like why is kitsch so like popular or in vogue? Because it's the only alternative aesthetic to like whatever the current aesthetic vision is. Right. I don't want some cringe Christian kitsch to be the replacement or the alternate aesthetic vision for whatever comes out of this current pause or woke malaise that we're under, right? So yeah, we should be a united positive vision, because the question that always comes after you clear them out is now what? And I don't want that to be the problem that we face.
And that was the topic of my speech at the first American event, which you can find that in the book that they released, and it is a direct like transcript of everything that I said, and I was sort of speaking someone on the spot just because I was not going to write out a full speech talking about a technical subject, because that is a good way to put people to sleep. So I just figured I would speak very sort of normally as if I was on stream, but in person with a Q&A at the end. But that is what I talked about, and it came directly after AA had released his speech on only the negative vision is what the right can unite behind. Somehow he and I came to completely opposite conclusions looking at history and at our first principles. That's not to say that I hate AA or we're mortal enemies now or we can't get along. That's just something we disagree on. Just because you look at the United States, for instance, and this is an example that I used in my speech. Sure, the positive vision led to many divisions and all this other stuff, but those communities actively thrived and were their own and defended themselves for centuries. Most modern philosophies that we have come across have been unable to thrive and defend themselves for decades, let alone centuries. So the positive vision, I would say, is ultimately a benefit, even though it would, there is going to be conflict, but there's conflict everywhere. There's conflict over the negative vision. How far do we go? Who exactly do we clear out? What do we do with them once they are cleared out? Execute, imprison, humiliate, reconciliation. Every single time that we have this idea that we just need to unite against this enemy, there is always going to be issue of how far do we go? Do we destroy everything that might remind us of them? Do we have sort of like a reconstruction regime where we completely destroy potentially more than just them, but also people associated with them? Do we get the general populace as well that was united behind them? None of these questions can really be answered because there's going to be division, and the point of the negative vision is that it prevents division. So I just don't buy into it. But that would be a conversation with the guy promoting that idea himself. But positive visions I do quite like. I'm attracted infinitely more to a positive vision than I am to we have this enemy that we just need to get rid of and we're not going to go anywhere beyond that. Just because to me that just speaks of some sort of weakness. There's just to use something much more vulgar as an example, on like corporate boards, if you have a division that tends towards 50-50, there is something dearly wrong with the corporation. 70-30, you're getting somewhere closer to there. 90-10, 90 or 85-15, starting to look pretty normal. So those things operate on a positive vision. Most things as well, other than money changing corporations, operate on positive visions. Your church, one of the key foundations of Western society, operates on a positive vision. Your family itself is on a positive vision. You have children so that your children can have children. You'll take care of each other. You're bound by God. You have obligations and duties. You love each other. All of those things are positive visions. I don't think that there can be anything founded just on a negative vision. And to their fairness, they don't claim to want to found anything on negative vision. It's just to get us into a better position, which then leads to the question, what comes afterwards? So that's that whole spiel. But you and I think, are firmly in the camp that we need something positive to strive for that we know is good.
Yes. You're not going to find any disagreement from me on that one.
Well, I mean, that's also from our Christianity. We're told that if we do anything without faith, it is just sinful.
Yeah.
So anything not springing from God is sinful, regardless of what it is. So if this negative vision, regardless of how good the intentions are and regardless of how good it looks in utility, is done for the wrong reasons, you and I, just by virtue of Paul telling us from Scripture, have nothing else to say of it but that it is sinful, which is, it's one of the great perils of modern society, because we're told that we can just get along so long as the utility looks fine. It doesn't necessarily matter what the intentions are. Well, Christianity says otherwise. So, with all of that, I figured we could pull some slightly funnier things from the conversation, because that's something that I absolutely love. I remember the first couple of streams that we had. You were on the first one when we did Roe v. Wade. You so very graciously helped me out with the technical difficulty because YouTube prevented me from streaming. Yeah, and yeah, we'll do this for about 10 or so more minutes. Yeah, uh, this was a. I was very excited to see that we had people actively discussing what we were talking about in chat. It felt like something had really been built. Um, so, and every now and then I will see something very funny. So back when we were talking about the virtual working, what we can't sit around jogging pants all day. Fascism. Yes, the lowering of standards is something that Jay Burton and I discussed quite in depth on our last stream. And you, Mr. Prudentialist, talk about standards quite a lot, implicitly, I gather.
Yeah, that and my co-host every Thursday, Gio Panichetti for the Digital Archipelago, is the thirst poster of all thirst posters, and we talk about standards in ways that are entertaining to say the least. But when people are posting their abs next to some anime Fumo doll saying that they don't want a fat woman, I mean, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be lounging around in jogging pants all day. But yeah, it would be absolute fascism for us to tell you to not sit on your ass and do something. When you do something positive for your life, that's a fascism.
Right. Pat Buchanan, peace be upon him. I can't believe we talked about the great prophet himself without saying the great words, peace be upon him. So we did have a word of caution from What the Fuck Am I Actually Right? He says, you two and many others need to understand that a lot of these people are on medication, the detransing people and anyone adjacent to them. Do not use that against them, but keep it in mind. That is fair. They are not.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a pipeline of birth control to SSRIs, even with people who don't transition. I can only imagine that. I mean, they're taking not only just physiologically, but also neurochemically altering substances that have permanently affected them. And I mean, the same thing with individuals that have decided to transition. And sunk cost fallacy comes to mind, not to mention that this stuff kind of keeps you alive after a certain point, and so you kind of have to take it. And that's even the more cruel part about it, is just that once they're on it, if you break from it, it very well could kill you. And I mean, the risk of cancers shoot up and all. Yeah, almost a guaranteed. If you're not going to do it yourself, then it's still 100% regardless.
Right, and it's a pseudo Faustian bargain there. Which I guess sort of describes the modern age quite well.
Almost as if progressives are really the true.
Yeah, so we have Matthew Berry saying the average age of marriage here is 37 men, 35 women. So that's me skewed. We will. That's me fucked, rather. So
yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot more of that here in the United States too. The age of marriage has also gone up increasingly, and what's even worse is that in this age of dysgenic practices, is like the age in which women hit puberty has been getting earlier and earlier, which is a evolutionary thing that we've seen when there are genetic bottlenecks. So like, oh man, things are about to get wild, not just in terms of like where you might live in terms of like reproduction and things like that, but I'm just talking about like the human species. Like things are going to get rough.
And the reason that I highlight that comment is not to just say we're all screwed or haha, look at this guy. It's more just the fact that that's the average. And the very fact that you are here watching this, not because I'm so great, but because you have to be a very strange person to be in these spheres to begin with, at least by normal modern standards. You are not the average. So don't try to conform yourself to that. You can do better than what everyone else around you is doing. And I'm quite confident in saying that to anyone that is listening on right now. With that, I think that's oh, here we go. I have no clue what this means, but I was before the end of the stream. Can you press Prude on the Suyu Asui question?
Oh my god. Okay.
What is that?
This individual has so for those of you who don't know, when I do my show Prudent Observations, I usually end everything after a dour or dry lecture on, say, the bargaining model of war or defensive realism, that I'll end things with my announcements, super chats, and frog of the week.
Yeah, I was going to say the frog posting.
Yeah, the frog posting. That's where my notorious branding comes from. Anyways, this individual has pointed out for Frog of the Week, this character is apparently some sort of frog character from an anime or a video game, and I say no to weebery and degeneracy. So Ain't ever gonna happen. Get over yourself. It's over. It's so over. Go home. You've lost.
Fantastic. Okay. I'm not even going to look into that. I have no clue what that is, but we have your answer there. So, last things that you'd like to shill, Mr. Prudentialist, and then we will sign off. I believe it is about time for you to go.
Well, by all means, do not be doing anything on November 7th. Don't even log in. Don't even take a look at that old Glory Club YouTube channel that you've been seeing being spread around. Don't do anything on Monday, of course. Don't turn in or go online. You know, we're like the cool kids telling you don't come to school tomorrow, but instead just don't come to YouTube tomorrow on Monday. But I will be live later at 1 p.m. Eastern, so 12 noon Central. I'll be doing my regular show. Because of how my guests have been scheduled to talk about international relations, this one will just simply be an Ask Me Anything and keeping up with the news. So a little bit of research on air as well. And then I have plenty more announcements as well to come, but you'll have to tune in on Prudent Observations later this afternoon to see those things. And in just a little bit, I'll be recording to do that very special thing on Monday that you won't have to worry about. But as always, Turnip, thank you so much. And you can find all my links down below, and you can buy me a coffee through the links at findmyfriends.net/Prudentialist.
Yes, and before you sign off, how many hours away is your stream later this afternoon?
Let's see. Well, it's about to be 11 o'clock Eastern, so it'll be 2 hours from now.
Okay, so 2 hours from now, go check out Prudentialist on his channel. He streams right after me. I remember we have shilled him on a couple of streams, and yeah, just go support our friends, especially if you liked what you heard here today, because Matthew does not just do cultural commentary, does not just do geopolitical commentary. He also has his own insights, very much unique to him. I don't think I've heard them very much from anywhere else. So, by all means, go and listen to them. And just to for that old Glory Club thing, this is probably my favorite advertisement we've had, just because it very much summarizes what it is that we are doing. We are Americans United. So, Monday, November 7th, especially afternoon Eastern Standard Time. Be very careful. Don't see too much. You might see Americans doing things organizedly. So, with all of that, thank you for joining us, Matthew. It has been a very great pleasure. And,
as always, Ryan, love talking with you.
With that, have a good morning, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed.
See ya.